the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. But if you can't plant it 20 years ago, plant it today. Very, very important is the consistency. Even just 1% a week over a year will give you huge improvement, rather than work very hard for 2 weeks and hope that everything is going to be solved. Nothing will be solved in 2 weeks. You make 50 phone calls, draw some results, and say, okay, what was the word or what was the sentence that helped you to stay on the phone call a bit longer, maybe gain an extra appointment to actually close a deal? I explain to people, I say, look, you can be very strong, but if you go against a brick wall, you might be there for 2 or 3 days, you're not going to push it. Sometimes it's important to step away from the wall.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Massimo. Can you start out by telling me a little bit about your journey and how you built up your expertise in this area?
Right. So good afternoon. My name is Massimo. I'm an Italian entrepreneur. I've been based in Cambridge for the last 30 plus years. I was a systems engineer for the over 10 years. And then I developed my interest more in being a marketeer. And within a couple of years, I was a marketing manager of a high-tech company. And then I got to a point in 2007 where I realized that I was getting not bored, but it was becoming a routine and I wanted to learn something new. My background already at that time was quite strong in practicing and teaching martial arts. And so I I read an article on a business magazine signed by a coach. And I said, Coach, I didn't know there are coaches that are not teaching sport. I was that ignorant at that time. I was very interested in how I could help people transform themselves by teaching them how to move in a different way to essentially what martial arts are. Then I was so fascinated by what coaches could do, which I decided to go to the Neuro Leadership Institute, which at that time was still called Results Coaching System. And then I liked it so much that then I did toolkits for coaches, business coaching, team coaching, executive coaching, career coaching. And I've been doing that on and off for the last 18 years.
You do a lot of work with early stage startups, is that right?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the interesting part of my job as a coach was being interested in working with high-tech startups, because I've been part of a couple myself and I've started a couple of others in the last few years. Therefore, I wanted to lend a hand to people that I need. And I joined Just Business School at the University of Cambridge back in 2009 in the Ignite program. So Ignite is essentially, I call it a mini MBA. I don't want to mislead anybody. It's not an MBA by any means, but it gives you the basis of what an MBA would give you, from market research to business model to finance to fundraising to marketing to sales and to investment. And then they basically, at the end of this week program, there is a panel of judges which will evaluate your pitch. I've been involved in that since 2009, sometimes in different roles. So I've been a judge, I've been a mentor, I've been a clinician. They call it clinics because they do a number of sessions which are called business clinics, where each person, like myself, and there are many of us, offer their expertise to those cohorts of candidates.
Really interesting crossover between the martial arts training that you do and working with startups is resilience. Because when you're an early stage founder, you're just going to run into problems so many times and you need to be able to adapt and cope with that. So how do you handle it when it doesn't work out according to plan?
Well, I think there are a lot of different things that can be applied, but in general, it's you see nowadays there are a lot of theories about what you should be doing when you run a startup, and all of them are right, all of them are wrong, because each startup, it's a little universe by itself. The people are funding it come from very different backgrounds. Some of them have maybe a bit of business background. Many of the founders in deep tech and biotech are usually scientists, are people that are used to work in a lab or in a high-tech company. And then they have this idea that it's going to change the world. Sometimes they actually do. So how do you overcome the problem? In general, obviously, you need to analyze what the problems are. Sometimes the problems are because you didn't plan very well. And there is an old saying that says, failing to plan is planning to fail. So in general, it's important to write down what you're planning to do, particularly if it's more than one person, which the majority of startups are. Particularly if you are interested in getting funding, no VC nowadays will fund a startup with a single founder. They want a team. They want to see team dynamic. They want to see team with a diverse set and complementary set of skills, so that there is a person who can sell, the person who can do the math, a person who can do the marketing, a person who can do the operations and the logistics, because each of them might be needed at some point. So very important to have a plan from the beginning, and then you need to be able to adapt the plan. Sometimes the situation which is changing and something that you didn't even think it could happen happens. So you need to be able to adjust and adapt to the plan. People that made it the big way, they say people who are successful never fail. But at the same time, they tell you that in startup nowadays, it's not important to start a project and finish it, but sometimes it's best to fail first, fail fast, learn what you learn, and sometimes do what they call pivoting. So pivoting is very much about changing direction. You started with a set of assumptions which you thought they were true. You arrive half of the way, and 2/3 of them were not true. So what do? Do you throw away? Maybe you develop already some scientific, you discover something interesting. Sometimes you say, oh, this actually can be adapted to something else. And that's where you pivot. Say, for example, the Post-its from 3M were trying to invent a kind of a glue that didn't really work. But then they realized that when they stuck it to a piece of paper, it was just nicely sticking enough to be useful, and they invented the Post-its. So sometimes invention don't come because somebody thought it on the first day that they wanted a little piece of paper with a bit of glue on the back, but it just happened.
It's so important to manage that dynamic, isn't it? Where
Sure.
you have to have a plan, or
Yeah.
you can't all work together. But then the plan is constantly changing because you're constantly surfacing new information about the problem and about what's possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, in the old days, failing meant a failure. You're marked as a failure and you're not good for something. But I've met a lot of entrepreneurs, very successful entrepreneurs, and it's interesting to see how even people that maybe had a great exit, a multi-million, a billion exit or something, sometimes you see when they make a list of the companies that they tried and didn't work, are sometimes half a dozen companies. In fact, in America, already now for a few years, most VCs, they are going to ask you about yourself. Are they going to ask you about what's your plan for investment and so on? But they want to see people who have tried lots of things and failed until you got maybe this one is the venture that they should fund. Very often you are stuck to your idea, you still think it can work and you stick to it, maybe sometimes for too long, but it's very difficult when it's time to pull the plug. Occasionally you have a piece of IP that you developed, and sometimes if it's well presented and adaptable, you might see new applications for it. And so you might register it, patent it, and wait, and somebody might come out and say, oh, actually, I need that piece of IP to apply to another project that I have. And sometimes it might be so far away that you would never think that is applicable. But again, it can happen.
How do you find that balance between chasing down the vision versus pivoting when you need to? And how do you feed it into that constant drive for self-improvement that gets you to the top of the mountain?
We live in a world where a lot of people nowadays, particularly the newer generation, which are a lot younger than me, they all want to achieve everything tomorrow or yesterday, if possible, tomorrow, this afternoon. So they are really keen to see success coming out fast. And very often, what they call the overnight success is usually something that comes out today, but has been the result of 10 years of work. Even Facebook, that sounded like an overnight success, it was 10 years in the making before it actually became what it is today, both in the business space when I'm coaching people in business, as well as to my students, when I'm teaching martial arts. It's better if you work very gently and progressively try to increase even just 1% a week, which over 52 weeks in a year will give you a huge improvement, rather than work very hard, work for 80 hours a week, very hard for 2 weeks, and hope that everything is going to be solved. Nothing will be solved in 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So very, very important is the consistency. If you start running today, you never run in your life. You can't start running a marathon. You're going to start by running maybe 100 meters. And tomorrow, if you set the limit of the 100 meters, which is 100 meters from your doorstep, tomorrow you can run 3 doors down, further down, and come back. And the following day, you run 5 doors further down. And you keep increasing little by little until one day you run 5K. But I think the little steps, and obviously it's important as part of this, like in every engineering project, is measuring what you do, measure the improvement that you gain over time. And also very important, and this is what I do as a coach when I'm working with people, is also self-rewarding. Reward yourself for the little achievements, because every day is a little improvement. If you measure it from yesterday to today, it's just 1%. It doesn't sound great, but if you measure it already after 5 days, it's a 5% improvement, which is a great improvement. So that's where you need to work, and that makes a huge difference in everything. So sometimes I help people to do business development, to sell better. So selling, you might not know exactly what sells, particularly if you're selling services. So you make 50 phone calls and you start making some draw some results. And say, okay, what was the word, or what was the sentence, what was the approach that helped you to stay on the phone call a bit longer, maybe gain an extra appointment to actually close the deal? And that is what, by measuring that, analyzing everything that failed. When you make cold calls, for example, you might have an average return rate of 2-3%. That means you have, on average, 97 calls that would tell you no. But if you look for the no very quickly and you say, hi, would you like this? And they go, no, thanks. Thank you very much. Boom. Don't try, oh, but you should listen to me. Because if they already said no, you're not going to change the conversation. And you're wasting your time. You're irritating them. So it's very important, measuring, adjusting, learn what works, learn what doesn't, repeat what works, stop what doesn't, and so on.
Makes time management a really crucial skill for success. Is that right?
Absolutely. And my time management is actually one of the topics that just about every one of my executive coaching clients actually work on. Why is that? Because it's very easy to say yes to lots of things. Oh, John, can you help me with this? Yes. Oh, John, I need 5 minutes of your time, which become half an hour. So very often we end up having way more work than we are supposed to be doing, and then we don't do it greatly. So let's not forget that whether you are anybody or you are Elon Musk, we all have 24 hours in the day. So 24 hours are not negotiable. Each of us have 24 hours in the day. Is not what, time management is an interesting name, but is essentially is activity management that allow you to fit as many useful and productive activities within the time you have available. Be honest with yourself. If you estimate that something will require 15 minutes, don't put 10, but don't put an hour either, because then you say, okay, I've finished my 15 minutes work, then I got 45 minutes doing nothing. So it's important to be effective and efficient in the way you do things. Prioritize very well your task. Make sure that, again, if you are doing a repetitive task and you allocate 15 minutes and you see that most weeks it takes 10 minutes, then from week 3, you might allocate 10 minutes. Equally, if you always allocate an hour to discuss just about everything going on in a large company, and at 55 minutes you discuss 3 points out of 8, then maybe next time you need to allocate 2 hours or 3. But again, there are another thing that I noticed many companies, they organize meetings with a lot of unnecessary people, when sometimes a decision process could be organized with a poll. If you are very clear about the decision to be taken and you take away any kind of subjectivity in the decision, you say, this is what we need to do, is A, B, or C, please vote, then I think many people could do it. So very important for time management is making sure that you are efficient and effective. So efficient in terms of not wasting time when you do it, but effective doing the right things, which is the most important thing.
What happens when you hit these problems that you just can't see any answers to? How do you get past it when you hit the wall?
Yeah, hitting the wall. Hitting the wall is an interesting concept, because sometimes I explain to people, I say, look, you can be very strong, but if you go against a brick wall, you might be there for 2 or 3 days, you're not going to push it. So sometimes you need to understand whether you need to cut a hole into the wall, or you need to find it. If it's not too tall, climb the wall, or if it's not too wide, you can walk around the wall. So I think it's important in terms of problem solving. And in general, when you're running a company, you're solving problems all the time. It's important that you are pragmatic. Sometimes it's important to step away from the wall to actually see what I said. Okay, is there a door or a window? Can I walk around? Can I climb it? And these are metaphors, but we are talking about sometimes obstacles seems impossible to go past, and you need sometimes not to go past them, but to avoid them altogether. Go back and find a different way to actually solve a problem, because sometimes that's what you need to do.
This is why that diversity in your founding team and your leadership team is so important, right? Because
Absolutely.
it gives you different perspectives onto a problem.
Yeah, diversity in terms of culture, diversity in terms of background, diversity in terms of skills. Engineers, scientists, philosophers, historians, they all work in a very different way, but sometimes you would not expect that an historian can fix or find a different way to look at an engineering problem. But that's perhaps where high-tech companies in the United States are so successful, because they are this kind of melting pot, which put together a lot of people from all over the world and with all sorts of skills.
I think that loops back to the planning that we were talking about at the start, because unless the team understands the plan, they can't contribute, and then you don't get that diversity.
Yeah. And also it's important that the team behaves like a team, so everybody has their own voice and is respected, and there is no such a thing as a stupid suggestion. Yeah, or sometimes the fact that you say something so absurd for the context triggers somebody else to say, no, this is impossible. But actually, and you might.
If there was one piece of advice that you wanted to give to early stage founders, what would it be?
Just one. I would say it's important to start doing. There is an interesting saying from, I don't know from which African language, they say the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. But if you can't plant it 20 years ago, plant it today and start working on it.
Thank you so much, Massimo. It's been fascinating.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.